Welcome back, everyone. This video will go over the second part of Chapter 9, which addresses other styles of writing the body of a story. So in the last module, we discussed the inverted pyramid style, which has been widely recognized as one of the most popular ways to write print news pieces. However, there are many other ways that you can format the body of your story. Probably the second most popular form of print news writing and the most popular in things like broadcasting is the hourglass structure. Now, the hourglass structure combines the strengths of the inverted pyramid style while allowing writers to have more of a creative narrative format. The way that this works is that the top half of the hourglass is an inverted pyramid. So you're really utilizing the heavy, important facts first, and then providing smaller details down below. And then you'll have what's called a turn or a pivot point where you can move it from that very basic inverted pyramid style to providing a more narrative chronological conclusion. And so what this does is it allows you to have a little bit more flexibility in being able to report within a 5W and H style, not losing any of the important facts, but still having enough creativity and flexibility to pivot the story and add a little bit more flair at the end. Here's an example. This piece was written by 3 journalists at the New York Times after the bombings in Paris. And so the top half of this story, you'll notice, follows a very basic inverted pyramid style. You're going to have a lead, which gives you some of the most important information first about the attackers, and then you're going to get some color and quotes. You'll get a little bit more numbers and statistics of the wounded and the death toll. And then they move on to more of a chronological report of what happened. And so they talk about when the assault began, how it unfolded, and then they go into the grief and the national mourning. They talk about what the motives could possibly have been. They talk to some survivors. And so you can see how instead of just following the very basic inverted pyramid style, which would have forced these journalists to really stick all of that information up top, here they get to pivot. And in fact, they pivot multiple times to multiple different topics while still keeping it in one story. So that is one way that you can use the hourglass style in order to write. Now, a second alternative style to the inverted pyramid is the focus style, and this is actually very popular in broadcasting and digital journalism. The focus style focuses on a particular individual, situation, or story at the beginning to illustrate a larger problem. If you'll remember back to the story that I used as an example of a buried lead, or a net graph in our inverted pyramid module, you'll remember I was talking about University of Iowa being used as an example to talk about the larger problem of coronavirus cases in university towns. So that would be an example of focus style. Here we also have how kids' video game accounts are getting hacked more during the coronavirus. And they use the story of Luke Martin, who is just your average everyday video gamer. He's a teenager in high school, and he plays online video game on the platform Stream. And someone purchased $200 worth of games and took all of the money that was out of his account through a scam. And it actually they were able to get his financial information as well and steal even more money. But what they were doing is they're focusing on Luke Martin's particular case. But the story really isn't about Luke Martin. It's about how online gaming has increased, and then because of that, fraud cases have as well. So here you're focusing on a particular individual or situation to describe a larger problem. There are really four parts to the focus style. The first is a lead, but the lead is going to look a little bit different than it would in a normal news story. A lead for the focus style is usually about three or more paragraphs, and it describes the newsworthy example. In the case I just showed you, we get about three paragraphs about what happens to Luke Martin and his family before we get to the net graph, which is really the central point of the story. It illustrates the larger issue that you're really wanting to discuss within the article. So the body then will develop the central point in more detail. This is where you would provide facts and statistics about fraud and online gaming. And then a kicker draws a conclusion in about two or three paragraphs. And typically in a kicker for focus style, you want to readdress your example up top. So in that piece that I just showed you, the author actually goes back and talks about what Luke Martin's family is doing to get their money back and further protect their son's account as part of the kicker. Narrative style is somewhat similar to focus style, except it relies more heavily on storytelling. So instead of just using a narrative as an example, the entire piece really becomes a narrative. And so it would be your job as a narrative style news writer to find people who are crucial to the action and observe them. The tricky part of narrative style is once you interact with people for a very long time, usually for a pretty long feature, it's easy to have your opinions swayed and biased by being around those people for a long time. So while the narrative style allows for more creativity and the ability to describe drama in a lot of detail through storytelling techniques, the challenge is it can lend itself pretty heavily to bias and opinion. So Dave Cullen is a famous journalist. He actually wrote the book Columbine and talked about how the city of Columbine, Colorado really was affected by the shootings there. And then he recently wrote a book called Parkland, which is obviously about the survivors of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas school shooting as well. Now, the interesting part about both of these books is he speaks to the survivors and really tells their story through these articles that are put into a larger novel or book. But for Parkland in particular, because of the movement that was created by the survivors of the shooting, he really got an inside look to a lot of very newsworthy aspects of their campaign to end school violence. And so a lot of Dave Cullen's work has been used both as narrative style journalism as well as contributions to his book. It is an excellent book. As I've said before, I study school shootings, so I've read both of these works and they are fabulous. But the problem that Dave Cullen has in his books is that he injects his opinions and his descriptions are a little colored by his experiences. So his books are not necessarily journalism, but he has translated some of those back into news articles that are a little more objective. Now, a narrative style, just like any story, needs a beginning, middle, and end. So just as you would in telling a story, you need to start kind of with a main character, describe the problem or journey they're going on, have them reach a climax in the middle, and then a resolution by the end. These pieces tend to be a bit longer, which means they're harder for editors to cut. And it's not appropriate for all stories by any means. If you have a breaking news story that just needs to be told quickly, this isn't the place to do it. I mean, Cullen's book came out over a year after the Parkland shootings happened because he was having to collect so much observation of what was going on. And so again, these tend to be more feature pieces that are used in longer magazine styles or in spaces like digital platforms that don't really have the same limitation for space. So now that you understand some of the basic styles of news writing, from inverted pyramids to narrative style, I want you to go in our discussion post and talk about the various differences in style of news writing. And then for your homework, you're going to use your workbook, Chapter 9, Exercise 3. I want you to write 2 full news articles based on the copy that you're provided within the workbook. One of them, I want you to attempt one of these alternative news styles that I've discussed in this video. So you can make both of them an alternative news style. You can do one inverted pyramid and one hourglass, whatever you want, as long as one of them features an example of an alternative news style that we just discussed. Finally, you'll go into your AP style homework, which will focus on part 2 of commas.